He was a powerful, single-dad CEO who thought nothing could surprise him anymore, until the night he sat down at a blind date meant for his friend and locked eyes with a poor girl whose scarred past hid a secret that would shake his empire, test his heart, and change his family forever. Ethan Carter never believed in blind dates. As a single-dad CEO, his life revolved around endless boardroom battles, contracts signed under fluorescent lights, and the quiet, aching nights spent trying to soothe his 8-year-old son Liam, who still sometimes cried for his late mother. Tonight, however, he found himself sitting in the corner of a small cafe downtown, not for himself, but because a friend had begged him to stand in as a favor. He didn't expect anything, certainly not love. The cafe smelled of roasted coffee beans and fresh lilies placed in a small vase on each table. Soft golden light filtered through the wide windows as the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden floors. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, the weight of his success sitting heavily on him. Despite the tailored suit and the aura of authority he carried, there was an invisible crack in his presence, a fracture only those who dared to look closely would notice. He was a man still living with shadows. Then she walked in. At first glance, there was nothing about her that screamed for attention. Her dress was simple, almost worn, the faded blue fabric carrying a faint scent of soap as though it had been washed too many times. But her eyes, deep, dark, and filled with 1,000 untold stories, caught him instantly. She hesitated at the doorway, clutching a worn leather bag that had clearly seen better days. And in that pause, in that fragile uncertainty, Ethan felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't desire, it was recognition. She was introduced simply as Clara, a poor girl who had reluctantly agreed to this blind date. She looked around as if the polished interior didn't belong to her world. When her eyes finally met his, the clamor of the cafe dimmed. Ethan had weathered negotiations worth billions, faced down corporate enemies in courtrooms. Yet one glance from Clara unraveled his guarded composure. It was, inexplicably, love at first sight, but it also terrified him. They sat down across from each other, and the silence between them was heavy yet oddly comforting. He noticed how she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous gesture, revealing a faint scar near her temple, too subtle for most. But Ethan caught it. He wondered about the story behind it. She noticed the tired lines beneath his sharp features, the way his eyes carried sorrow despite his firm handshake. Their small talk barely mattered. Beneath the surface, something far deeper was unfolding. Ethan's mind, however, betrayed him with memories. A flashback crept in. His wife's laughter echoing through their old home, the smell of baby soap lingering on Liam's blanket, the sound of the ambulance the night of the accident. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself back into the present. But the contrast was stark. The grief of yesterday against the unexpected light before him now. Clara spoke softly about her work at a diner nearby, about how she was saving every penny to help her younger sister go to school. She mentioned it without self-pity, her voice steady, as though hardship was simply a language she had long learned to speak. Ethan listened, not as a CEO accustomed to commanding conversations, but as a man starved for authenticity. And Clara, without realizing, fed that hunger. Every detail about her, her resilience, her quiet strength, pulled him in deeper. He caught himself studying her hands, slightly rough from work, yet delicate as she wrapped them around the warm mug of coffee. They weren't the manicured hands of women from his social circle. They were real, marked by survival. As the minutes turned into an hour, Ethan realized this meeting was not random. It felt orchestrated by fate, cruel yet merciful. He, a man armored with wealth but hollowed by loss. She, a woman stripped of material comfort yet rich with dignity. Together, they formed a contrast that shouldn't have fit, but somehow did. When Clara smiled for the first time, it was hesitant, like a sunrise breaking through clouds. And Ethan felt his heart betray him, leaping forward before his mind could intervene. He had not smiled like that since before the accident. The weight of his grief loosened, just slightly, in her presence. Yet the moment terrified him, because love at first sight was both a gift and a curse. It carried the promise of healing, but also the risk of shattering him once more. As Clara prepared to leave, adjusting the strap of her old bag, Ethan knew this was not the end. Something inside him whispered that tonight marked the beginning of a story far greater than a blind date. He watched her step into the twilight, her figure framed against the fading sun, and for the first time in years, Ethan Carter felt alive and unbearably vulnerable. Ethan Carter could not shake Clara from his mind. Days after that unexpected blind date, he found excuses to visit the diner where she worked. It was not the polished restaurants he was accustomed to. The linoleum floor was cracked in places. The air smelled faintly of frying oil and brewed coffee, and the neon sign outside buzzed weakly in the night. But there was something about that place, or rather, about her presence within it, that drew him in. Clara greeted him with the same soft smile each time, though he noticed how she stiffened when other patrons whispered about the expensive suit he wore. She carried trays with practiced grace, but he could see the exhaustion in her posture, the faint shadows under her eyes. One evening, after her shift, they walked together under flickering streetlights. Clara spoke reluctantly about her past, her words careful, as if each sentence carried weight. She told him about her father who abandoned the family, about her mother who worked 2 jobs until her health collapsed, and about the night she and her younger sister, Lily, were nearly evicted. There was no self-pity in her tone, only quiet strength, the kind that comes from surviving storms no one else sees. Ethan listened, and his chest tightened, not from pity, but from admiration. She had endured battles far harsher than corporate wars. Yet, as their connection deepened, so did the resistance around them. Ethan's closest advisors pulled him aside during board meetings, their voices clipped with concern. "This relationship could cost you your reputation," one warned. "Investors don't want headlines about CEOs dating waitresses from diners." Even his longtime lawyer suggested discretion. But discretion was not something Ethan believed in when it came to authenticity. Still, the doubts crept in late at night when he watched Liam sleep. Was he jeopardizing his son's stability for a fragile hope of happiness? And would Clara, with her own burdens, be able to step into the chaos of his world? Clara faced her own storms. At the diner, a few wealthy customers mocked her, whispering that she was chasing Ethan for money. She pretended not to hear, but Ethan saw the flicker of pain in her eyes. He wanted to protect her, but Clara insisted she could fight her own battles. What neither of them anticipated was how their worlds would collide in a far harsher arena: the courtroom. Ethan's company, Carter Industries, became embroiled in a high-profile lawsuit filed by a rival corporation. The allegations were baseless, but the media swarmed, hungry for scandal. Clara's existence soon became ammunition. Headlines screamed, "Single dad CEO seen with poor waitress amidst lawsuit turmoil." The insinuations were cruel, painting her as a distraction, a liability. The weight of scrutiny pressed down on them both. For Ethan, it was not just his company at stake. It was his credibility as a father. For Clara, it was her dignity. Yet beneath the firestorm, Clara's resilience only shone brighter. One evening, in a rare moment of vulnerability, she told Ethan about her mother's court case years ago. Her mother had been wrongfully accused of theft by an employer, a powerful man who twisted evidence to destroy her reputation. Clara had been just a teenager, sitting in the back of the courtroom, clutching her sister's hand as the gavel fell and injustice sealed their fate. That memory carved itself into her, fueling both her mistrust and her determination. Ethan was silent for a long moment after her confession. He reached across the table, his hand brushing hers, and for once, he didn't feel like a CEO making a calculated move. He felt like a man acknowledging another soul's scars. But the world outside was merciless. Paparazzi trailed Clara, shoving cameras in her face as she walked Lily to school. Online tabloids dissected her appearance, sneering at her worn clothes. The cruelty cut deep. One night, after yet another ambush of flashing lights, Clara broke down in Ethan's arms, her voice trembling. "Maybe we're not meant to survive this. Maybe I'm just a burden dragging you down." Ethan's chest burned at her words. He thought of his late wife, of promises whispered in hospital rooms, of Liam's laughter when Clara baked cookies in their kitchen. He realized that letting Clara go would not protect his world. It would hollow it out again. And so, at the next court appearance for his company, Ethan did the unthinkable. As cameras flashed and reporters shouted, he paused on the courthouse steps with Clara by his side. His voice rang steady as he declared, "This woman is not a liability. She is my choice, my truth, and I will not hide her." The silence that followed broke into a frenzy. Some gasped in shock, others ridiculed. But in that moment, Ethan knew he had chosen authenticity over pretense. Clara's hand trembled in his, but her eyes glistened with fierce pride. They had stepped into the storm together. The days following Ethan's bold declaration at the courthouse were the hardest he had ever endured. Overnight, he and Clara became the focus of relentless media scrutiny. Commentators debated his judgment. Investors doubted his leadership. And even Liam's schoolmates whispered cruel words about his father's choices. Yet within the storm, there were also quiet moments that whispered of a different future. Clara began spending more time at Ethan's home, not as a guest, but as someone who filled the silence with warmth. She cooked simple meals, her laughter spilling into the kitchen as Liam helped stir cookie dough, flour dusting his small hands. The scent of vanilla and sugar filled the air, blending with the soft glow of sunset through the curtains. Ethan would often stand in the doorway, watching them, the ache of loss in his chest slowly transforming into something gentler. Hope. Still, shadows loomed. Ethan's rival in the lawsuit, Victor Hale, was a ruthless businessman with a history of crushing anyone who stood in his path. As Carter Industries' trial began, Victor's lawyers painted Ethan as distracted, claiming his relationship with Clara proved he was reckless. Their strategy was cruel but effective, sowing doubt about his capacity not only as a CEO, but also as a father. For Ethan, the most harrowing moment came when an opposing attorney suggested in court that Liam might be better off with a guardian until his father regained focus. Rage surged through him, but it was Clara's steady hand on his arm that kept him grounded. She whispered, "Justice will come. We just have to endure." Clara, too, faced her past more directly than ever before. A reporter uncovered the old court case involving her mother, spreading headlines that revived the humiliation Clara had buried for years. She wept when she saw the articles, not for herself, but for her mother, who had died without her name cleared. Ethan refused to let that injustice stand. He tasked his legal team with digging deeper into the past. What they found was staggering. Victor Hale had been a junior executive at the company that had destroyed Clara's mother. Old documents surfaced, buried for years, that revealed tampered evidence. And the man who had asked Ethan to take his place on that fateful blind date, Daniel, turned out to have kept copies of the documents. He had never known their value until now. Suddenly the puzzle fit. The lawsuit against Ethan was not just corporate rivalry. It was Victor's attempt to silence any chance of the truth resurfacing. The trial's climax was electric. The courtroom was hushed as Ethan's lawyer presented the long-hidden files. Pages yellowed with age were projected for the judge to see, exposing the fraudulent practices that had destroyed Clara's mother. Gasps filled the room when Daniel testified, confirming he had held on to the documents for years out of guilt, but had never connected the pieces until Clara entered Ethan's life. Victor Hale's face drained of color as the truth unfolded. The case against Ethan crumbled, and in its place rose a new charge: fraud and malicious prosecution against Victor himself. The gavel struck, and for Clara, the sound was not just legal victory, it was the breaking of chains that had bound her since girlhood. Tears streamed down her face as Ethan held her hand tightly. The court recognized her mother's innocence, restoring dignity that had been stolen decades earlier. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored, but this time the narrative had shifted. Headlines no longer branded Clara as a liability. They hailed her as the woman whose courage helped unveil the truth. Ethan's reputation soared again, not because of wealth or power, but because he had chosen integrity over convenience. Yet the most profound victory was private. That evening, back at home, Ethan found Clara in the living room with Liam. She was helping him with homework, her gentle patience weaving a maternal tenderness that Ethan had feared his son would never feel again. Liam, usually cautious, leaned into her embrace without hesitation. Ethan's throat tightened. In that moment, he retrieved a small velvet box from his study drawer. Inside was a bracelet, silver, delicate, once worn by his late wife. He had kept it locked away, a relic of a love he thought could never be replaced. But now, as he placed it in Clara's hands, his voice was steady. She would want you to have this, not as a replacement, but as a continuation of the love that keeps us alive. Clara's eyes glistened as she clasped the bracelet around her wrist. Outside, the night air carried the scent of blooming jasmine, the garden alive with flowers opening after the rain. It felt symbolic, pain transformed into beauty, despair giving way to new beginnings. Ethan drew Clara and Liam close, the three of them framed in the soft lamplight. His world was no longer fractured. It was being rebuilt. The trauma of the past had not vanished, but it had been honored, healed, and integrated into something stronger. Justice had been served, love had been rediscovered, and a new family was being forged, not out of perfection, but out of resilience. For Ethan, for Clara, and for Liam, the journey from grief to hope was complete. And in that quiet living room, their story became not just about surviving, but about truly living again. In the end, Ethan, Clara, and little Liam proved that love can bloom even in the most unlikely places, and that justice, no matter how long it hides in the shadows, will always find its way to the light. Their story is a reminder that healing takes courage, that scars can become symbols of strength, and that even after loss, a new beginning can rise like a flower after the storm. If this journey touched your heart, consider subscribing to the channel, sharing this story with someone who might need hope today, or leaving a super thanks to support more soul-stirring tales like this one. Together, we can keep spreading the message that love and resilience always win.